title of the talk tonight is Trying to Seduce the World. So when we use the word to seduce, generally we're talking about, trying to sort of arrange a situation, create a circumstance to gain sexual pleasures. Okay, so it's a form of manipulation, but it's sort of a kinder and gentler form. It's not a forcible act. It's not based in physical force or intimidation or psychological management. It's an acceptable form of interacting with others, and if it's done appropriately, it can be well received, or maybe not, who knows. But anyway, that's how that term is typically used. We're not going to talk further about that particular use of the term, but what I wanted to do is draw attention to this movement of trying to engage the world for our own benefit, which is basically what seduction is. It's not generally intended to, create a long-term relationship. It's meant to create a situation for one's own pleasure. So we can really look at how often we may be engaged in the same movement, but just to get other things that we want in the world. For example, if let's say we desire wealth for some reason, it's unlikely that any of us listening tonight would, forcibly rob a bank to get wealth, but, we may be willing to woo our boss into giving us a raise by, working long hours, or going to a company party that we don't really want to go to, or showing up at work sort of more positively perky than we really feel, and these are all relatively acceptable ways of being out in the world, but it's useful to see that it's a similar movement. It's consciously making efforts in hoping that the world will respond in a way that I get what I want, right? In my favor. So it's useful to see, like just in this example, it's not so much the wealth in itself that is desired. It's more the feeling that I'll have when that wealth is acquired, right? Maybe I'll feel more secure, more important, more free to choose what I do. Maybe other people might envy me. So, but I'd suggest that even those aren't really the underlying motivation. The underlying motivation is really to be happy, and we see those things as being necessary to be happy, the feeling safe and secure and important and fulfilled, and those kinds of things. But we seek those not for themselves. It's not so much the wealth itself. It's not like getting the bank statement at the end of the month and counting up the number of digits on the bank statement gives us happiness in itself. It's what that sense of wealth gives us in terms of the feeling. So it's the feeling happy, joyful. That's really the goal. But we see the source of it is out in the world somewhere that has to be obtained. And in our simple example here, we see it as gaining monetary wealth in my job, that gives me my sense of security, and that therefore I feel happy. But what we're really after is not the job, not the bank account, not the feeling of importance. It's really the underlying sense of just being happy. So we go about it in this sort of very roundabout kind of way, and we can just go through a couple of other examples to really give us a feel for this. A lot of these movements, we can see very clearly in probably ourselves in our teenage years, but when people are in the process of developing their identity, we can see this expenditure of energy and emotional investment, to be in the right social sphere, the right club, the right team, and if I'm accepted there, then life will be great. But when we really look at it, it's not so much that being part of that club or clique is in itself so pleasurable, but it's the feeling that we have by being accepted in that way, by being in a position of some status or some degree of specialness, or but that underneath all that is still this desire to be happy, right? We can see it play out when people, let's say in high school, play sports on the field, they're admired, cheered on. There's a certain pleasure in just that physical movement, seeing what these bodies can really do. But there's also very much alive there this sense of being on exhibit, being qualifying for an appropriate partner or date, and we see that movement, that energy moving in that direction. But again, it's not the it's not the physical stardom. It's not having the right date. Underneath it, what's really sought is just this sense of peace, joy, happiness, right? But we see that the source of that is in the circumstances, is in the experience outside. And we go to all of these efforts to try to coax life into providing the experience of the situation that will yield pleasure, peace, happiness for me. But we're quite convinced that the source of it is out there. And one of the challenges is we can't just demand it. There's not an absolute 100% of the time formula for obtaining happiness. If I do X, Y, Z, I'll be happy. It doesn't work that way. We might find ourselves going for a walk in the park, having a beautiful time, just delightful, at peace for several hours, one beautiful fall afternoon. And then maybe a few weeks later, we go back to the same park, expecting to be equally happy, hopefully more happy. But we go back and, maybe that day there's, something on our mind. We're looking for a repeat of that beautiful experience, and it's just not quite the same. So the happiness is sort of fickle that way. We can't just demand it and do X, Y, Z and be happy. It doesn't quite work that way. Or we might go out to dinner with friends, have a wonderful time, just be thoroughly engaged. Even the next day, thinking back on, what a wonderful time we had, and it still feels good. And then maybe a week later, we have dinner with the same friends again, sort of expecting the same degree of camaraderie, and it's not quite there. For some reason, it's an off night. We can't just demand it and have it show up. So our solution to that is, well, I'll just keep looking for other circumstances, another experience, something that seems more likely to bring us peace and contentment. Often we don't even seek directly for peace and joy and contentment. You just look at the activity and think, well, that would be fun. I'd really enjoy that. And the focus is still on the activity, the circumstance, the experience, rather than whatever it is that we are that is having that experience, right? So, but the one thing, we may seek and seek, try this, try that, never quite knowing if it'll produce the desired goal of happiness. But the one thing that we never do, the one thing that we never question is the whole paradigm, the whole paradigm of that source of happiness is lodged in the circumstance or the experience, right? Whether it's an accomplishment, whether it's a meditative state, whether it's a spiritual vision, whether it's the next social get together, one's career, whatever we're expecting will yield happiness. We never question whether that happiness is already present within. That's what we never consider. We always suspect that it's out there somewhere, and our job is to try to create the circumstances out in the world that will yield a pleasurable experience for us. Basically, we're trying to seduce the world into giving us what we want. That's what we spend a great portion of our life doing, right? In all kinds of fields. But I'd suggest that the underlying movement is always the same. It's always like, what will make me happy? What will produce that sense of contentment, peace, joy? But we believe that we have to sort of coax it out of life by getting life to sort of arrange circumstances, arrange situations to give us that sense. And one of the things that we expect from enlightenment is that if I was enlightened, well, then life would fall into place, and those pleasurable circumstances would come my way much more often. Life would be easier, but it's not like that at all. It's not that we get what we want. It's really that we want what happens. Big difference. When we want what happens, we're not in opposition to life. We're not fighting life. We're not imposing our will on life and hoping, really, really hoping that life complies. Life listens to our pleas to be a certain way to make us happy. And it seems like, the more we demand life be a certain way, for our benefit, of course, the less forthcoming life is in terms of situations, events that, really produce real contentment, real happiness. And, conversely, the more we allow life to unfold as it does, as it happens, the more things seem to have a beautiful way of unfolding. Not that everything is easy, not that everything always turns out in our favor. We all know this. But if we're not in opposition to life, then things just move more smoothly. That lack of opposition makes all the difference. And the reason it makes all the difference is how we perceive things that we like and things that we don't like. Because that's how we're looking at events as they come our way. Is this to my advantage or not? Is this to my disadvantage? Do I like this? Do I not like this? Do I like this person or not? Is there something in this situation for me or not? We tend to look at life coming towards us from a very egocentric point of view, right? From what's in it for me. But when we look at it, it's not in the situation itself. The like or dislike is not in the situation itself. It's not in the circumstance itself. If it were, then we'd all agree on what was likable and dislikable. If it was in the situation, then everyone would have the same likes and dislikes. But we know that's not true. Some people like to cook, some people don't. Some people like to watch sports on TV, some people don't. But if it were in the act of cooking or in the experience of watching the football game, then we'd all have the same. It would either be a likable situation or not. But it's not that at all. It's our what we are not in opposition to, what we allow to happen, willingly allow to happen, we say we like. What we're unwilling to have happen, where there's some resistance to what's happening, we say we don't like it. So it's not in the situation itself, it's in our conditioned opinion of what we think about the situation, right? So the whole like or dislike has to do with the filter that we're looking at the situation through, the very conditioned filter based on everything that's happened in the past. By looking through that filter, we have a situation we like or a situation that we don't like, and we oppose that on the situation. If we like it, it's basically saying yes to the situation. We're open to it. We're willing to engage in it. We move forward. In that, we're not opposed to life. Everything unfolds beautiful. When we don't like it, we put on the brakes, we hold back, we're in resistance, and that feeling of no, I don't want this to happen, I don't like it, this shouldn't be happening, all of that, we can feel this contraction setting in. That contraction is the sense of us in our separate personhood, separating ourselves back from life, pulling ourselves away. Me here, life there, and I know what should happen. I know how this should work. I don't agree with how life is appearing in this moment. So that opposition, that opposition actually creates the sense of self. Right? We think it's the other way around. We think, our sense of self is solid, it's who we are, and we have the perfect right to decide, I like this and I don't like that. I like this activity, I don't like that activity. Right? But it's really, when we look at it, it's really the conditioning that of ourself, in other words, our past, sort of the, everything that's gone before, and that way that it sort of creates a veil through which we see life, and we impose that on the situation. So it's not the situation itself, it's the conditioned view of whether it's acceptable to me or not acceptable to me. In other words, I stand in judgment of life. If this is the next thing that happens, it's up to me to decide whether I agree with it or not. So it's a very sort of self-elevating feeling, like I get to choose whether I like this or don't like this about life. But what we may notice, if we're paying attention, is when we're opposed to what's happening, we suffer, right? So let's say one day we're, I don't know, pouring concrete and having a good day, and then the next day we're, laying concrete block, and we're not enjoying that. So when do we suffer? We suffer when we decide that we don't like whatever it is that's happening next, right? Whatever life is presenting, we can choose to be okay with it or not. When we're not okay with it, we put ourselves in opposition to life, and when we do that, we suffer. I mean, why would we do that? Why would we place ourselves in opposition to life when we know that life always wins? However life shows up next. So we can choose either to be on board with that. It doesn't mean that we have to, flip from not liking to liking. It's the same game. It's just the real question is what's needed. What's needed next? Does it require my involvement or not? It actually doesn't have to do with liking it or not liking it. Putting ourselves in a position of judging everything that happens from a liking or not liking standpoint causes us to remain firmly entrenched in this egoic sense of self, because we're the ones that deciding what should and what shouldn't happen, what life should be or shouldn't be. And when we do that, then we're constantly asking life, trying to seduce life into giving us the situation that we want. Right? That's the movement. It's almost like we're quite certain that there's sort of gold buried in a certain place, and our job is to dig and find it, and then that's the reward. But we're quite certain it's outside of ourselves. I was once in Western Australia. Perth is like the very westerly city in Australia, but east of Perth is just this flat desert, really scrubby land. But gold had been discovered there some years before, and I don't quite remember how or why I got out there, but I do remember driving around in this quite huge territory, and flat and open, just sparse vegetation, and there were holes, like pockmarks in the earth, where people had searched for gold, digging a hole here, finding or not finding, digging another hole there. And my sense of it was just this sort of frenzied, hopeful activity, mixed in with frustration and disappointment and hope for the next one, and moving somewhere else, digging another hole, and big holes dug by hand for miles. And it was just this sense of desperation, this sense of seeking, hoping to find. Um, but that's exactly what we're talking about here, right? Hoping that the next experience, the next circumstances will be where the gold is found. You know, the mother lode of experience that will be the one that's ultimately fulfilling, the one that sort of makes sense of my whole life. That one experience that'll be so compelling that if I never have another, high spiritual state for the rest of my life, I'm good. If I die tomorrow, I'm fine. That kind of experience is what we keep hoping for and not finding. So we have two choices here, basically. We can continue to look for that ultimate experience out in the world, in the next experience, the next circumstance, next event, or we can drop our opposition to life. We can recognize that life will happen. Sometimes it may go our way, sometimes not. But if we remove our insistence that it go a particular way, then we're available however it shows up. We're available to respond appropriately when there's an enjoyable circumstance, beautiful. We're also available when there's a more challenging circumstance. And I'd suggest that both are necessary. The idea is not to always feel blissed out. And that won't happen. There might be extended periods of real contentment, but life seems to give us our share of challenges as well. And I'd suggest that the challenges are really where really contribute to our spiritual maturity, or just life maturity. Without adverse circumstances, would we really have the, capacity for compassion that we may have now? Would we have the understanding about ourselves and others that we have now? So I when things go our way, beautiful, enjoy them. There's not a need to deny ourselves that. But also when life brings us challenges, we can appreciate those also. Granted, they may be more difficult to deal with, but in some ways they're also more rewarding long term. So we can see the benefit of that, and rather than sort of compartmentalize them in our mind between this I like, when I feel good, and this I don't like when I'm being challenged, we can just see it's all part of the same life circumstances, and allow that life to unfold as it does without the attachment for it always turning out the way I want it to turn out, right? So this, when we talk about this, it's not very popular, right? It's like saying, well, what's really in it for me to allow, life to just be as it is? If I didn't really care what happens, if I didn't care what happens to me, where would I be? Good question. Sort of gets to the heart of it. Who cares? Who is it exactly that cares what happens? Well, it's me, right? The separate self cares because it wants what it wants. So we're back in this game of I want what I want, therefore I want life to show up like I want it to show up, and we spend our time and energy trying to make life do that, trying to coax it, seduce it into giving us the circumstances that we want, that we think will make us happy. Right? But this, I would suggest that the issue isn't the desire for peace and happiness. That's a natural movement. I think it's a natural movement because it is what we essentially are already. And we know that deep down, and we know it's possible. Maybe not consciously, but we know that there's something about life that has the potential to fulfill us. We may not have quite realized it yet, but we strongly suspect that that's possible. And so we seek it naturally. So the seeking it isn't the problem, or the desire for happiness isn't the issue. It's the direction that we're seeking. The direction that, as long as we're seeking it as if it resided outside of ourselves, we will always miss it. If it's here and we look for it there, we will always miss it forever. Until we get tired of that game and turn around and see what's actually here, what's actually been here all along. And life is actually always pointing this out to us. Every time we get frustrated, every time we get disappointed, every time we get our hopes up and they get dashed, life is pointing out this fact. We're looking in a direction that may sometimes go our way and sometimes not. But it's not the source of happiness. Happiness is what we are, not what we do, not what we can experience out in the world of form. So J. Krishnamurti was an Indian man, started life as a beggar on the streets in India, but eventually was found and educated and had an awakening in his teenage years, was later educated at Oxford or Cambridge, I can't remember which, and lived to an age of, I think, about 90, and taught for almost 60 years. And he taught all over the world, and audiences of hundreds, if not thousands, and taught for 60 years. And many people had listened to him talk for most of their lives. And towards the end of his life, there was a talk that he gave in Switzerland, and during the talk, he talks about all kinds of aspects of spirituality. But anyway, during this one particular talk, he said, I'll tell you my secret. So here are these people that have been listening for 40, 50, 60 years, and here finally Krishnamurti's going to give away his secret. And so everybody's sort of on the edge of their chairs and wondering what the secret to life is that he hasn't revealed in 50 years. And he said, I don't mind what happens. That was it. So it's an openness, it's a receptivity to allow life to present itself rather than us trying to manage life. But we hear that and we think to ourselves, yeah, that sounds good, but I'm not sure it's a really good idea. There's a fear there of saying, well, I know I don't have total control about how my life unfolds, but I believe that I have some control, and to give up even the little control that I have for no control, how is that a good idea, right? So even when we can acknowledge to ourselves that, um, we can't control life, the best we can do is try to coax a few pleasant or really pleasant circumstances our way every now and again. Um, but even then, we're reluctant to give that up, even for the promise of coming into alignment with the wholeness of life. We think, well, I'm not so sure. I think I'll stick with my sense of limited self-control. I know it hasn't always turned out the way I wanted, but I'm going to go with that. So there's this holding back, this reluctance. So we tend to trust ourselves more than we trust life, and yet we can see it doesn't take a great insight to see that life always unfolds as it unfolds. Sometimes it goes our way, sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes the tide comes in, sometimes it goes out. It is always moving. If we're trying to hold on to our particular little island, there'll always be a sense of anxiety there. Because even when things are going our way, we know that they won't always. So that anxiety might be subtle, might be acute, but there's never a deep relaxation as long as we believe that we are the ones that are in a position to manage or try to manage what happens. The real relaxation is when we allow life to be what it is, however it is. We take off the shackles, we take off the blinders, we allow life to be as it is. It will do that anyway. It's not like we're allowing life to do it. What we're doing is coming into alignment with the reality that life will unfold as it unfolds. And if we're available to that, beautiful. We get to enjoy when times are good, things are easy. We get to fully engage with that. When times are more challenging, then we're also available to respond to that as may be needed for the circumstances, rather than from a position of liking and disliking, right? Whatever's needed for that particular circumstance, if we're not coming from what's in it for me, then we're just available to whatever the situation requires. So we don't really need to approach everything that happens from a classification of whether I like it or I don't like it. By just removing that filter, we become available for life. It's really when we're willing to just say yes to life, sort of you can feel it almost energetically, is just take off the armor and allow life to happen. When we say yes to that, we're available to it. We're available to respond. Our whole energy is available. When we are fighting that, holding ourselves separate, then that energy is contractive. We can feel it enhancing the little me, the separate self, right? We feel more powerful. This sense of ego really comes from saying no to life, holding ourselves separate from life is what creates this whole sense of egoic separate self. what diminishes that sense, what relaxes that sense, is saying yes to life, openness to life. This non-opposition, sort of deflates this sense of self-importance. When we get our, when we're opposed to what's happening, think it shouldn't happen. Why is this happening? Why is it happening to me? This isn't right. All of these arguments with life, those are all, self enhancing. We may feel beaten down by it, but it still creates this sense of separation, right? This sense of contraction into this body mind, me, as opposed to the rest of life. When that sense is relaxed by being present and available for whatever does unfold without our mental judgments coming in to divide life into likes and dislikes, then everything flows more smoothly. It's not that difficult things don't happen, but we're fully available for them rather than wasting our energy arguing with why it shouldn't happen. And this can come in even in with a certain degree of spiritual awakening to our true nature. I mean, we can be cognizant of our awareness as our essential beingness, and still the mind can come in and argue with that, saying yes, but it wasn't quite as exciting. I had hoped for more. Where's the juice? Where's what's the next thing? Where's the excitement? Where's we need to understand it more. I mean, we can argue even with a revelation of our true nature, rather than just allowing that to reveal itself more and more, trusting life to give us what is needed rather than us trying to push life into giving us what we want in the way we want it. So it's like we like enlightenment, the idea of it, but we like it on our terms. But that's not actually how it works. Life is always pointing us towards something deeper, ever deeper. And our job, at a certain point, our job is to be available for that. Alert, alive, of course, but available to come more and more into alignment with how life is presenting itself at every moment. Every moment is an opportunity. Life isn't divided into spiritual life and ordinary life. It is all one life. It's all a teaching. It's all a gift when we understand how it's presenting itself for our benefit, for our growth, for our greater and greater understanding.